Today, fake news and exaggerated headlines seem like the average news report in a magazine cover, yet the origins of sensationalist news traces back to the 19th century. During the 1800s, newspapers and journalists began utilizing their freedom of speech and press to their advantage as they began writing more about politics and fake news to attract larger groups of readers. Two of the largest newspapers at the time, run by William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, publicized a new style of reporting. The coined term of this style was yellow journalism, which reached its peak in the 1890s. The use of yellow journalism in both Hearst's New York Journal and Pulitzer's New York World, competing newspapers, during the 19th century popularized the use of eye-catching cartoons and sensationalist news to attract revenue and large audiences, persuading readers' stance in political wars. The overarching influence of news in America continues to modern day in clickbait and fake news. The origins of yellow journalism began with a competition between two of New York's largest and most popular newspapers, Hearst's New York Journal and Pulitzer's New York World. William Randolph Hearst attended Harvard University, which led him to his apprenticeship to Pulitzer at the New York World. Hearst learned about the ways of journalism and running a newspaper from Pulitzer before he left the New York World to start his own newspaper. Once he owned the New York Journal, Hearst employed workers from Pulitzer's newspaper and continuously copied his style. As Hearst started his newspaper, Pulitzer's Journal began making strides in illustration. In 1884, Pulitzer's New York World was the first newspaper in New York City to truly use editorial cartoons. By the 1890s, a very popular American cartoonist, R.F. Oakalt, pioneered the modern colorful comic strip. In 1895, Hogan's Alley comic series by R.F. Oakalt first debuted for Pulitzer's New York World, which featured the Yellow Kid. After Hogan's Alley and the Dugan Kid became popular, R.F. Oakalt became more and more recognized for his work. In 1896, Hearst and his New York Journal raided and employed many of the New York World's artists and writers, including R.F. Oakalt. At Hearst's newspaper, Oakalt continued what he was best at, making cartoons of the Dugan Kid, who became more known by the Yellow Kid once he made his debut at the New York Journal. Hearst's New York Journal featured McFadden's Row of Flats comic strips by Oakalt. After Oakalt was taken from Pulitzer's Journal, Pulitzer continued his original strip in hopes of keeping the Yellow Kid's popularity at his newspaper. Pulitzer's New York World hired George Lukes to take over and continue Hogan's Alley, initiating the start of two competing Yellow Kids between the two newspapers. As the competition continued, the use of yellow journalism became more widespread. Both Hearst and Pulitzer reduced the price of their newspapers to 1 cent, leading to a wider and larger distribution of yellow journalism. Pulitzer and Hearst were in a heated competition throughout the 1890s for the title of best and most popular newspaper. Hearst's New York Journal won in sales because Oakalt's version of the Yellow Kid is more popular. The Yellow Kid's main target audience was the middle and working class, evident through his slang and ridicule of the higher class. Many of Oakalt's illustrations depicted children from the lower classes of New York. All the children have run-down shoes and raggedy clothes, appealing this cartoon to the lower classes. In another one of his illustrations, there's a little girl in a shawl begging in the snow, resembling the lower classes, hoping to appeal and relate to them. A sign on one of the upper floors of the tenants tells Santa to take the ladder because their home has no chimney, further targeting the poorer classes. Another lower-class group of people that was growing in New York were immigrants, new to the country and the culture. Yellow journalism targeted immigrants as it used generous amounts of illustration, not requiring a perfect understanding of English. As the immigrant population grew, so did the lower class as well as yellow journalism's audiences. The tradition of yellow journalism was popularized as their audience spread across the country into all different groups of people. During the late 1890s, yellow journalism's peak brought along sensationalist headlines and large, bright illustrations to draw attention and engage their audiences.
Lots of sensation, lots of screaming headlines in enormous type, lots of illustrations.
Yellow journalism largely consisted of exciting headlines about fake news and stories that were unimportant to most readers. Yellow journalism was known for invading privacy to turn rumors and suggestions to headlines and supposed truth. Pulitzer's New York World popularized his newspaper by emphasizing crime and scandal stories in detail. As yellow journalism increased their audience, their non-traditional customs also increased their opposition. The Truth newspaper called out yellow journalism as having no sense of privacy or decency, exploiting public and private stories alike. Hearst and his New York Journal had a large dispatch yacht, resembling a sailboat called the Buccaneer. Based on Hearst's reputation of invasion of privacy, he used this yacht to find more controversies and scandalous stories he could publish. Overall, unverified sensationalism was primarily used by Hearst in the wake of the Spanish-American War. In 1898, a United States naval ship exploded and sank in Havana Harbor. A journalist who had seen the explosions of the USS Maine firsthand wrote that the explosion took place on the ship, but Pulitzer's New York World emphasized that the explosion happened on or under the ship, despite the original report. Later on, another source, George Eugene Bryson, reported that the USS Maine was destroyed by a torpedo, which led to the New York Journal releasing this headline.
Hearst immediately publishes on his front pages a variety of stories going after the Spanish, all made up.
His reporting was sensational, it was exaggerated, it was in many cases distorted.
Furthermore, in one of his articles, Hearst offers a $50,000 reward for anyone who can find out who destroyed and sunk the USS Maine ship, attracting the attention of many people. Since yellow journalism's main audience was the middle and lower classes, this headline appealed to them and caught their attention. In addition, Hearst declares in the title of the article that it was the work of an enemy, and in the lower fine print, he states that naval officers believe it was the work of Spaniards, as he takes rumors and declares them as truth. From this point forward, any headline referencing the Spanish caught the attention of worried Americans.
The sensational coverage by the tabloids spread anti-Spain sentiment throughout the United States. At first, President McKinley hesitated to take action.
Hearst's New York Journal published an illustration featuring Spaniards searching a naked woman on an American steamer, which presented controversy, drawing in attention. Spaniards presenting authority on an American steamer initiated scandal and more anger towards the Spanish. In one drawing, Uncle Sam is seen out to dinner with a woman with a waiter serving them. The waiter is pouring a drink for Uncle Sam with the bottle labeled Spanish Colonies. A cartoon referencing the Spaniards called upon and targeted yellow journalism's main audience in the United States, those who opposed the Spanish. Furthermore, yellow journalism's cartoons of Hogan's Alley featured current events and politics to grow their audience. The cartoon of Hogan's Alley preparing for the convention features kids dressing up as and pretending to be adults, as two kids ride an elephant labeled GOP, referencing the Republican National Convention in 1896. With their use of yellow journalism, sensationalist traditions, Hearst and Pulitzer grew a large audience and large influence over the country. In the late 1890s, the beginnings of war was reported through yellow journalism as new opinions began to form and were influenced by the most popular newspapers. The Spanish-American War was a fight for the independence of Cuba and is also known as the First Media War. Just before the war, Hearst and his newspaper helped liberate a Cuban prisoner, Evangeline Cisneros, and aided her escape to New York. The war began as Spanish aggression towards Cuba angered Americans because they were a close trading partner.
And these deeply upset Americans for social reasons, for religious reasons, for political reasons, and also in part for economic reasons. Cuba was an important nearby trading partner.
Hearst sees a developing story in Cuba where the bad guys are the Spanish, the damsel in distress is the Cuban people, and the hero is going to be William Randolph Hearst and the American government.
As yellow journalism began referencing more of the war, newspaper audiences provided material support sent to Cuban fighters and called for Spain to leave the islands. In the wake of the war, Hearst sent an illustrator to Cuba that reported back to Hearst that there was no war to cover, and Hearst replied, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." Hearst used tactics of furnishing false stories to tend to his audience's hatred toward the Spanish. The growing aggression toward Spain because of sensational yellow journalism pressured President McKinley, who was hesitant to go to war with Spain. Yellow journalism's influence over their readers ultimately resulted in the declaration of war. Over the course of the war, more photos and illustrations were distributed to continue the negative depiction of Spaniards and the increased distaste of Spaniards in readers. The Philadelphia Inquirer also references an olive branch from Uncle Sam to a Colombian woman who was presented as an ally and an underdog in yellow journalism during the Spanish-American War. In this cartoon, the leaves, or the olives on the olive branch, are labeled different countries like Cuba and Madrid because they are allied with America and seen as a fueling force for the war. In another illustration, Uncle Sam is being held back by President McKinley, referencing the common opinion in America that McKinley was a coward during the Spanish-American War. Furthermore, in this drawing, Uncle Sam is trying to fight the vulture preying on a woman who is labeled as Cuba, as his cartoon is implying that Spanish are vultures on Cuba. America's distaste for Spain did not cede after the end of the war, and along with it came the start of hatred for yellow journalism. People may have started to find distaste in the color yellow because of its resemblance to Spain's flag, and therefore the Yellow Kid. People wanted to put a stop to yellow journalism because they began to realize the extreme popularity of fake news and where it was heading. It was argued that yellow journalism was turning the idea of journalism into a business instead of a profession, as it contained more and more advertising and headlines and cartoons. After yellow journalism's peak during the Spanish-American War, its popularity reached its downfall as readers came to their senses about the true influence these newspapers had on their lives and their personal opinions. Both Hearst's New York Journal and Pulitzer's New York World utilized yellow journalism during the 19th century and publicized attention-grabbing, colorful cartoons and sensationalist headlines to grow their audience and enhance their influence. Their powerful popularity throughout the country gave them the power to influence readers' opposition to certain countries like Spain. Overall, yellow journalism's influence still continues today in the form of clickbait or clever headlines. The population and their online presence contributes to the power of yellow journalism. Strategically place photos and cartoons engage readers and tempt them to click on an article and read it. Biased articles can influence and determine readers' opinions on many political events like elections or simple oppositions that could lead to large events. like wars.